We've often talked on the show about our admiration for Fire.org, which essentially does what the ACLU for many decades used to do as well, which is defend our core civil liberties, including free speech and free press, without the slightest regard to who are the ones attacking it or who are the ones whose rights are being eroded. Nico Perrino is a friend of the show. He's the Fire's executive vice president. And he's also the creator and host of Fire's, so to speak, the free speech podcast, where a lot of interesting discussions take place. I believe I was on there once, and if not, I'll demand a appearance very soon. Prior to his current role, he led Fire's communication department for nearly a decade, and his writing has appeared in many places throughout the country and the world. He has become one of the foremost, and I think one of the most interesting civil liberties advocates. He's also the author of the forthcoming book, Triumph of the Civil Libertarians: How a Generation of Lawyers, Writers, and Activists Created America's Free Speech Century. Nico, it is always great to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Glenn, happy to be back here.
All right, so there's this spate of very unusual lawsuits that have been brought by Donald Trump against numerous media outlets, and I think if these lawsuits were plausible or viable, nobody would have a problem with them. President Trump has the same rights as a citizen as anyone else, not to be defamed, not to be defrauded, etc. But I think at least in most of these cases, if not all, any person who's a lawyer, or even let alone someone who's specialized in media, would tell you that they would never take that case for fear of being sanctioned. That's how dubious and weak they are, and almost certain to get booted out of court. And in so many of these cases, these big corporations have paid massive amounts of money, unthinkable amounts, millions and millions of dollars they'd never paid to anybody else. In order to settle the lawsuit, they go to Donald Trump or his presidential library or somewhere else that he directs it. The latest case is the CBS settlement by CBS's parent company, Paramount, paying $15 million to Trump's presidential library, not even because he claims they defamed him, but because they claim they edited Kamala Harris's pre-election interview in a kind of way that made her look better than she really appeared, which could be valid, but I can't imagine that would be the basis for a lawsuit. What is going on? Why are these media companies that usually take the very hard line when they're sued over their journalism suddenly opening their pocketbooks and pouring millions and millions of dollars out?
Yeah, well, to understand that, I think it's important to get some background here. So let's talk about the Kamala Harris interview, right? So she's interviewed for the election. Donald Trump actually declines to be interviewed by 60 Minutes. Bill Whitaker is interviewing her. Bill Whitaker asks her a question about Israel, and she gives a 2 to 3 sentence answer. In its broadcast, 60 Minutes uses like the first part of that answer and leaves out the second part. In a social promotion, it uses the second part of the answer and leaves out the first part. But both parts of the answer essentially say the same thing. But it's Kamala Harris. She speaks often in word salads, and 60 Minutes edited for length and clarity, as all news programs do. I mentioned to you, or you had mentioned in introducing me, that I created the documentary Mighty Ira. It's a 90-minute documentary that has about 50 hours of recorded footage that we needed to combine down into 90 minutes. All documentaries, all edited TV segments, all Netflix limited series that you watch, edit their programming for length and clarity. That's just the nature of broadcast or televised media. Now, some people will say, well, this is election interference, but I want to caution people. Trump didn't file a lawsuit alleging election interference. He filed a lawsuit in Texas alleging consumer fraud, the idea that this was a fraudulent interview. Now, you might think it is. You might think it isn't. You might buy that it was just edited for length and clarity. But there are two things you need to understand about the First Amendment. That lying, so long as you're not defaming anyone, and no one's alleging defamation here, is protected by the First Amendment. You can lie about receiving the Medal of Honor, as the Supreme Court has ruled. Other than that, what is this? This is just another way to go after misinformation. We opposed it when the Biden administration did it. Now we're opposing it when the Trump administration does it and calls it something else, whether it's consumer protection, consumer fraud, or news distortion. These are all words for the same thing, and they're all protected by the First Amendment.
Let's assume for the moment that the allegation about the 60-minute editing in terms of their motives is correct, namely that Trump's view of what they did and what their view of a lot of his supporters did was accurate, namely that CBS, 60 Minutes are known Democrats. They are hostile to President Trump like most of the media. They were really desperate that President Trump lose the election and Kamala Harris win. The answer Kamala Harris gave was kind of incoherent. and let's say even worse than incoherent, part of it might have been offensive, and therefore 60 Minutes edited that video in a way to protect Kamala Harris and her political reputation and her chances in the election. Let's assume all of that is true. Is there any basis for a opposing politician to sue a media outlet based on the fact that they edited an interview in a way that was too favorable to that subject?
No, I don't see any viable claim that would withstand First Amendment scrutiny. I mean, MSNBC does this all the time. Fox News does it all the time. At the same time that Trump was making these allegations about CBS, people were on the other side were making these allegations about Fox News when Trump appeared at a barbershop in the Bronx, and Fox News had edited out a bunch of stuff that was also incoherent. Look, there's going to be no love lost here on the media. I'm not here to defend the media. All I'm here to do is to defend the First Amendment. And if we are going to oppose using the tools of the federal government or the most powerful person in the United States of America and the world to prevent them from making an exception to the First Amendment for misinformation, then you need to stand against this, just like we needed to stand against it when the Biden administration alleged that social media companies were tweaking their algorithms to favor one thing or the other. I mean, this is something that you need to stand against regardless of who's in power. And if the more that media companies, whether it's Meta or X, which have also capitulated and settled with over claims that were frivolous, the more they do this, the more the Trump administration or a future administration is going to see this as a viable way to put media organizations under the boot. Behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And Trump was rewarded today to the tune of $16 million.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like if you sued Fox News for their 18 months of coverage convincing Americans that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons and we started a major war based on those lies and it turned out to be untrue. And then suddenly you're suing Fox News or the New York Times that did the same thing, or the New Yorker, or all the journalists involved. Part of a free press is that they're permitted to say things that end up being partisan or spun or ideologically motivated or even in error or false, again, as long as you're not defaming anybody. Obviously, if they had 60 Minutes published a report saying Donald Trump was a pedophile and they knew that was false and it turned out that it wasn't, and he would have a good claim to sue. Let me ask you this question, though. So, okay, it's a threat to press freedom to have these companies held liable for these kinds of reports, but the reality is, and I can say this with 100% certainty, absolutely none of these cases were going to go anywhere. They were going to be thrown out right away, precisely because of what you just said. And yet, you have these media companies that, again, usually if they're sued, like Sarah Palin sued the New York Times because they had implied, I think very unfairly, that she was somehow responsible for the shooting of Gabrielle Giffords, that congresswoman in Arizona, because she published a report putting a target, a kind of a gun target or a rifle target on the districts. Put it in the crosshairs of the districts she wanted to turn red, including Gabrielle Giffords' district. And the New York Times published this crappy, sleazy editorial suggesting she was responsible for the murder. And they fought Sarah Palin for, 5 years, up and down the appellate process, 2 different jury trials. They ultimately prevailed. They spent, millions and millions of dollars. That's what media outlets typically do in a case like this. Here you have a far less plausible case, and yet these media companies are opening their coffers and turning over many millions of dollars to Trump or entities that he has an interest in. Why are they doing that?
Well, there are 2 reasons for that. The first has to do with the unique position that Paramount, CBS, the parent companies of 60 Minutes are in right now. They're trying to merge with Skydance Media. And in order to merge with Skydance Media, they need to get FCC approval, the Federal Communications Commission. And in order for that to go through, there is this perception that Trump needs to essentially sign off on it. So Trump had criticized 60 Minutes, not just in this lawsuit, but in a tweet, and urged his FCC chairman to impose maximum fines and penalties on 60 Minutes for this news segment. After that, and after the lawsuit, we saw that Bill Owens, the longtime executive producer of 60 Minutes, 24 years executive producing the show, had resigned because he said for the first time in his career, the suits at the top of 60 Minutes, at the top of Paramount, were telling him how to direct his coverage at 60 Minutes. So there was this merger that they needed to get through, and they needed the federal government to approve it. The second thing is that we have seen that Trump is willing to file lawsuits and is willing to use the power of the federal government to go after his political opponents. So even if you keep fighting this out in court and you win at every stage, there is the risk that Trump's going to find a new way to go after you and make your life miserable, just as he's done with Harvard University, by the way. Harvard has won at every stage that it has fought the Trump administration in court. But as the Soviet Union once said, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And there's something like 9 or 10 different investigations of Harvard for all these alleged infractions that are going on right now. And it's all seemingly retaliating against them for standing up against the Trump administration in the first place. So it's the merger, and it is the standing up to the Trump administration. I'd say one other thing about Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, who was really good on policing misinformation and threatening news outlets.
Oh yeah, he was on my show. We had him on my show at least a couple of times when he was not the chair of the FCC, but a minority member, because he was very outspoken about the evils of big tech censoring political discourse, which we agreed with him completely. And then he gets to be the chairman of the FCC and starts threatening media outlets that if they spread disinformation or partisan reporting, that they're going to have the government come after them, which seems very similar to the thing he was condemning.
Yeah, and he wouldn't call it misinformation. He'd call it news distortion to obfuscate what's actually happening here, which is policing of what he alleges to be news distortion, but is actually misinformation. But Brendan Carr was pictured going to a bunch of government meetings wearing a gold lapel pin with Trump's face on it. So when you have the president of the United States, the man who appointed him to be chairman, who told him to impose maximum fines and penalties on 60 Minutes because of this Kamala Harris interview, and that chairman is wearing a Trump gold lapel pin, if you're one of CBS, Paramount's lawyers, what are you going to think about the outcome of this news distortion complaint? What are you going to think about the outcome of this FCC review of your planned merger with Skydance? You could understand why CBS or Paramount would seek to settle, even have all the First Amendment behind them. If there is no viable claim that Trump has that this is actually a form of consumer fraud, you could understand why they would come to this conclusion, because they've seen what's happened to other people. I mean, on the same day that or within the same 24-hour span that they went after, or that they announced a settlement with CBS, Trump said that we should look into Elon Musk and maybe sic Doge on him because he criticized a bill in Congress. And this is the president of the United States saying that we should investigate and potentially Doge Elon Musk and his companies because he publicly criticized a bill in Congress. I remember when Joe Biden stood at the podium and suggested that the federal government should look into Elon Musk's foreign ties around his purchase of X, and conservatives were up in arms about this. There is radio silence about this. And Glenn, you know this. We are nonpartisan advocates for free speech. We were just as vocal over the last decade in going after liberal censorship. But the opposition or the opponent of free speech is always power. And right now, the boot is on the other foot, and conservatives have power, and they're wielding it to go after their political and ideological opponents. If we believe in free speech as a principle, we need to call out our side when it's doing the censoring.
Yeah, I mean, look, when I first heard of FIRE, it was in connection with your advocacy, and I'm not sure you were with FIRE at the time, but certainly at its founding when it became known. What FIRE primarily was doing was defending conservative students and right-wing speech, because it was increasingly being the target of censorship and punishment by university administrators. And a lot of people at the time believed that FIRE was a right-wing group because that's where a lot of its support came from, because at the time it was battling against more left-wing administrators, and then people like when you do that and get upset when you start applying the principle equally. Let me ask you this. You know, I certainly do share a lot of the right-wing critiques of media outlets. I do believe they are overwhelmingly devoted to what they perceive as their mission that's superior to journalism, which is stopping Donald Trump and his movement. I believe they manipulate the news and their reporting to propagandize on that behalf. They skew things all the time. I absolutely believe that. I've been saying that for a long time. That's nothing new. But at the same time, every president in my lifetime hated the media and believed the media was extremely unfair to them and in favor of the other side, starting with Richard Nixon, who had enemies lists of people in the media. That's how much he hated them. Yep. And you go through all of them. I mean, Bill Clinton thought the media was trying to destroy him and his personal life and his family because of their obsession with Whitewater and that whole scandal. George Bush. I mean, every president you go through, no president ever thinks the media is on my side. Really, I've never heard anybody say, by the way, oh, the media is biased in favor of my views. But as much as all of these presidents had the same views of the media as Trump has of the media, they're manipulating the news on behalf of my opponents. They're propagandizing the public. Have any of them tried anything remotely like this as a way of retaliating against the media or forcing them to get into line?
I mean, I'm sure they have in the past.
I mean, like lawsuits. Lawsuits for their personal benefit.
Yeah, well, in this case, it's important for your listeners to know, as you suggest, the lawsuit was filed by President Trump in his personal capacity. And it's not the first time he's done this. We're representing a client in Iowa right now, Ann Seltzer, who is a pollster, who got a poll wrong about the outcome of the 2024 election, predicted Kamala Harris was ahead, or the polling suggested that Kamala Harris was ahead, and Donald Trump is suing her in the state of Iowa again for consumer fraud. It's another frivolous lawsuit. But no, this is very unique, and the last 6 months have been unique. We haven't seen the threats to free speech from the executive branch at this scope, scale, and intensity, at least in the last 2 decades, not in my 13 years doing this work. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, we have the forced multi-million-dollar settlement with Paramount that was over, obviously, First Amendment protected activity. You've threatened Elon Musk, a private citizen, and his private companies with a federal investigation, spoke out publicly against a bill in Congress. President Trump threatened CNN with prosecution for reporting on the existence of an anti-ICE app, and he threatened a mayoral candidate with added government site because he is allegedly a communist. I mean, what's going on here? Conservatives, and I joined arms with conservatives for the last decade, would have been up in arms over this if, for example, a presidential candidate or a president said that he was going to put extra scrutiny on a mayoral candidate because he was conservative. I think we need to apply the principles of free speech evenly, regardless of who is in power. And even at the FCC, which oversees broadcast media, at the end of the Biden administration, they dismissed some news distortion, again, another word for misinformation, news distortion complaints against CBS, ABC, and Fox. And they dismissed another one against NBC for an equal opportunity complaint, all because this was First Amendment protected activity. There was nothing to see here. There's nothing to investigate. But then when Brendan Carr comes in and President Trump assumes office, they reopen the complaints against CBS, ABC, and NBC, but do not reopen the complaint against Fox. This is just blatantly partisan, blatant violation of First Amendment. We need to call it out when we see it. But unfortunately, I think too many people are being quiet as these violations continue to occur. And we haven't even talked about all the other threats to the First Amendment over the last 6 months related to criticism of Israel or to people who are here on visas or green cards who are getting deported because they're writing op-eds. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Celebrate Independence Day. As you might know, that's happening this week on Friday, and some people celebrate it Thursday as well, with an epic July 4th sale. Stock up on the best supplement from brickhousenutrition.com. Save big, 25% off everything with the code FIREWORKS25. Get lean. Their #1 weight loss supplement packed with natural studied ingredients, no injections, just real results to help you slim down for the summer. Or try Field of Greens, the superfood drink. So powerful they guarantee your doctor will notice your boosted health or your money back. They've been a sponsor of ours for quite a long time, and we've heard nothing but good things about them. Collagen peptides are yet another fan favorite for glowing skin and hair. Beauty experts say collagen is the fountain of youth for skin and hair. And I'm sure you're looking at me saying, well, you, Glenn, have the fountain of youth. You preserved your youth, and it comes from thinking about how to do it with all of these products, from weight loss to wellness. Brickhouse Nutrition has it all, and our listeners can't stop raving. The sale is huge, but it's only here for a few days, and products will sell out. Don't wait. Head to brickhousenutrition.com and use Fireworks25 for 25% off. Let's go big this 4th of July. brickhousenutrition.com. Stock up now. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.